Last week I had a chance to use the Sony 200-600, so I went out, take some photos and videos, mainly just birds. Does this lens from 2019 still worth getting right now? I want to answer that in this video. First of all, let's go through the specs real quick because I don't want to waste too much time right here. 2.1 kilogram, retail at around $2,000 US, but we'll get deeper in the price later in the video. The size is 11.1 centimeters wide and 31.8 centimeters long with a 95mm filter diameter. Minimum focusing distance is 2.4 meters and it has 3 different stabilization modes. Number 1 for just general shots, number 2 if you are doing painting, and number 3 is for those sports bird shot that is hard to predict. Sony website said it is for erratic movements. Personally, I have no idea what that means and I don't think it helps me understand the situation at all. For me personally, I just leave it on 2 because most of the birds I shot were pretty chill. Okay, so let's get into the user experience. The first thing I noticed when I got this lens is it is pretty heavy, 2.1 kilo to be precise. If you go to the gym, you know that 2.1 kilo is not a lot. I use it for short and warming up, but 2.1 kilo on a lens is a totally different story. Hand holding it is definitely possible, but not a recommended way to use this lens. I guess it has something to do with the weight distribution and the size of this lens, because this lens is pretty big and you can feel the center of the mass is not right in the middle, it's actually closer to the front glass, so you actually don't want to hold it on the lens foot. You want to hold it pretty much like a rifle, that way your left hand is giving the most support. Changing the focal length on this lens is surprisingly easy. In some lenses, if you want to zoom in, you have to twist it over and over again, and the ring is really tight, so it's really hard going from one end to the other. But not on this lens. On the Sony 200-600, you go from 200 to 600 with just one simple twist. It's actually like a 90-degree turn. And the ring is not tight at all, in a good way. I was pretty surprised how easy it is to zoom in and out on this lens. And speaking of zooming, another thing I like about this lens is it is internal zoom. Unlike its third-party competitors like Sigma or Tamron, the Sony 200-600 does not change the length when you zoom in and out, so that means you are less likely to get lens creeping and it's easier to use on a gimbal head. And I guess it looks less intrusive if you decided to use it on the street like those creepy Instagram street photographer. Please don't do that. Focusing on this lens is really good too. When taking stills, it snaps focusing point right on the bird's eyes with no problem. Same with flying birds. Videos are also not an issue at all. There's no hunting. You can see the camera pick up the object and then immediately lock the focus. And probably to your surprise, I'm shooting with the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, and that is a camera without the newest AI chip like the Sony a6700. So the focusing system will work just fine or even gets better with a newer body. On this lens, you have the access to the function button and the side panel, and they are really handy. Even though I really think that the side panel should be put right next to the function button, like in the middle of the lens instead of the end of the lens, because that makes way more sense to me. It's easier to adjust, but I think there's no company that is doing that, so it is what it is. The layout is very clear, easy to use. You have your focusing mode, you have your focusing range, the stabilization. It has pretty much all you need. And you can map the function button to pretty much whatever you want. But the biggest downside of this lens is definitely the size. It's really big. The diameter of the lens filter is 95mm. So good luck to finding those filters. And this lens is 31.8 centimeters long without lens hood. Again, without lens hood. So you are going to having a hard time carrying it in the bag, but I guess that is what you have to sacrifice for a nice telephoto lens. Personally, I put this lens in my bag and then I put my lens hood on the other side of the lens, which means I put my lens hood on the side of the mounting ring. That is my personal packing tips. But yeah, the size is, to be honest, really annoying. That makes me want to use the Sony 100-400 with the 1.4 converter until I look at the price. Another thing to point out is that when I was shooting with this lens with just hand holding, I have to rely on the stabilization of the lens. And the faster shutter speed when taking photos and higher frame rate when shooting videos. The footage that came out of the camera is still quite shaky even though I had stabilization turning on. So you definitely want to utilize slow motion or do some post-processing on stabilization. So that is why I shoot most of my shots on 120 FPS. But after I switched to holding it like a real video rig, basically holding it right around my hip and look at the monitor, it's actually not that bad and fixes a lot of the stabilization problem. For quality, I really like the footage that coming out of this lens. Is it the sharpest result I've ever seen? No, the prime lens are definitely sharper. Is it sharp enough to take great photos and later on cropping? Absolutely. I can zoom in to see the textures on the feather, I can resize the picture and cropping the footage. It is just satisfying result. But what about fringing, chromatic aberration? In terms of chromatic aberration, I don't see anything that is too crazy unless you go pixel peaking on the edge of the picture when it's 5.6 or 6.3. You might see some green magenta thing going on the edge, but that is you have to really pixel peaking, so I don't think chromatic aberration is an issue. Finally, should you go for this lens? Personally, if you can afford it, I would say absolutely yes. Especially you can find it used because it's a pretty old lens, or like in my country, you can find brand new from a reliable store for around $1,300 US. Why is it that cheap? Well, because it's from a gray market. I rarely buy things from gray market. I don't buy electronics from gray market, but for a lens, I don't think it is an issue, because let's be honest, how many times have you really sent your lens back to the manufacturers? For me, 0. So the image quality is really good, the focusing is really decent. The only thing I hate about this lens is just the size and the weight, but that is just the nature of the telephoto lens. But when do you want to consider a third-party option? If you really need a compact telephoto lens, then you might want to look at the Tamron. If you cannot spend $2,000-ish on the lens, then you might want to look at the Sigma. The lens is $500 cheaper than the Sony 200-600. Or again, the Tamron, which is almost $1,000 cheaper than the Sony 200-600. But if you choose Tamron, you lose some ability to zoom in. And let's be real, 100mm is actually a lot. So that is the trade-off you want to consider. If you are shooting with Sony A1 and A9, Sony do have a FPS cap on a third-party lens. These are all the extra things to consider, and I will leave the answer for you to decide. For me personally, I would go for the Sony 200-600, and yeah, that's pretty much it. See you guys in the next video.